Morning. When I first made this presentation on design and reuse in Shanghai, I must say I was more comfortable than doing it here. After all, we now are in the country which is claimed to be Cartesian and in a city which is truly scientific. And here I'm talking about irrationality in favor for the semiconductor industry. Half a century already is gone, and almost started with the death of Carl Gustav Jung, the founding father of the psychology of cultures and the best guide for exploring our deep motivations. Over the 60s, Fairchild started semiconductor startups in the valley around Stanford, which staffed their research teams in MOS silicon gate transistors. At that time, my PhD advisor, Michael Arbib, published a little book called Brains, Machines, and Mathematics. Now I want to reassess this with a perspective of 50 years, and considering the three kinds of irrationality: the individual irrationality related to our personality slant, the corporate irrationality due to group compromising, and the relational negotiation irrationality in commercial or partnership relationships. And I try to apply it to three fields which are unrelated: economic, technical marketing, and financial. Of course, I'm going to say things which can be quite unpleasant for some people, and forgive me, but I think it's part of something which is worth investigating. I selected 7 areas of irrationality in the foresight of disruptive innovations, in the forecast of technological shifts, in the acceptance of unavoidable industry trends and resistance to it, about the intellectual property and the funding of innovation, about the application of complex mathematical theories in the wrong way, and the fate of computer architectures, and finally, in the opposition between completeness and efficiency. All right. Neuroscience. Neuroscience was started in 1964, and it led to a number of theories, starting with cellular automata, threshold logic, neuronal networks based on a very naive view of the brain works, even though, as far back as 1918, Carl Jung had warned that the brain works not just with information, but with energy, psychic energy based on emotions. So let's talk about that. I took a quotation from the Canadian Donald Kahn in 1999. The essential difference between emotion and reason is that emotions lead to actions, while reason leads to conclusions. Now, there is a distance there. From conclusions to actions, decisions depend on personal types of orientation in view of an innovative proposal. Now, Carl Gustav Jung explained the 4 types, major types. Now, the thinking type, the rational guy, he needs to know the basic facts and reasoning, which is our most rational source of knowledge. But that's only 1/4 of the population. Next 4th, the sensation-oriented person. He wants to see a prototype demo, otherwise he will not believe in it. The value-feeling type only cares about whether it fits the strategy. Finally, the intuition type is satisfied with a deep hunch, our most irrational source of knowledge. Trying to make a rational decision in view of disruptive innovations, well, a group will rely on a decision matrix with weighted criteria and an explicit figure of merit. That's rational. But the collective decisions are unlikely to discriminate. Visionaries are lonely. "1964. When I came out of the School of Engineering, we knew that Grenoble was ahead because I had made the right choice going to germanium. There had been 2 Nobel Prizes, one at TI for germanium, for transistors on germanium, and one from Intel, but it was on silicon. Also from Intel came Moore's Law, an edict which is both a personal proposal based on intuition and forever a substitute to rational collective decisions. (1984) was a time of giving up silicon and sapphire to go to silicon and insulator, which is another kind of insulator anyhow. And we were told it would be soon to be unavoidable for low power consumption. It's still awaited 35 years later and claimed to be soon unavoidable. 2004. Mixing analog and logic would not be worth it beyond 0.35 micron. We still do mixed signal design below 35 nanometers. Now, we are at the turning point. We are at the turning point because most predictions indicated that Moore's Law would stop at 10 nanometers. While we rationally keep Moore's Law working in 2024 with a higher volume of fabrication demanded for 10 nanometer processes. The surprise, which has not been well observed, is that the last 50 years were based on 2D representation, on the printing technology, printing on PCBs or printing on silicon, unfortunately labeled the foundry. Moving from 2D electronics over the last 50 years to 3D electronics is the way Moore's Law can escape the limitation of 10 nanometers. 1969, Jerry Sanders created AMD to compete with Intel in a race for integrated electronics. 1982, Carbon Mead published that silicon compilers and foundries will usher in user-designed VLSI. Silicon compilers and silicon foundries. 1990, Jerry Sanders claimed that real men have fabs. Resisting against deverticalization of the semiconductor industry by silicon foundries is a long and painful process of going from being integrated device manufacturers to acknowledging being fab-light to accepting being fabless. 2012, AMD sells their fab to Global Foundries. Resisting against the verticalization of the semiconductor industry by silicon compilers, which leads to the silicon IP suppliers. I was told in 2000 that IP doesn't work. And then, of course, came the era of the SoC integrators. 1997, first IP conference in Santa Clara. But the financial resistance to the new business model for the semiconductor industry has been strong. So it took the form of refusing the model of royalty payments. It meant that buying real components in proportion to production use was going to be replaced by paying at once, if you don't accept, if you want to pay everything as NRE, which is, on the cash management for the industry, a heavy burden. So the cash shift backwards for the same functional contents from real components on devices for PCBs, refusing the design and reuse for costing down. The consequence is that the semiconductor industry vortex shifted across the Pacific Ocean. China is not behind. 1974, another change had to be considered. TI launched the learning curve, fabrication forecast in volume, and volume fabrication driving cost reductions. But here, there has been a big fight within China, because in reality, margin cuts for costing down are beaten down by downsizing through redesign. So we are not at the end of this prevalence of designers. 1997, the Virtual Socket Interface Alliance, unfortunately of short life, introduced the protection of IP rights. But then there is an issue. Patents are not respected as they could be. The alternative is secrecy, and the other alternative is accelerating the pace for further innovation. Sorry, you don't look very often at Chinese television. Cao Tingyang, in his book From Heaven to Earth, he's very well known because he's a philosopher that appears in Beijing television. China and Occident. This is on, I start by giving you the end of the sentence. I'm afraid also that commercial protectionism and the monopolistic rights on knowledge and technique, etc., the multiple taxes, shall bear a part of responsibility in the increase of worldwide economic disorders. That doesn't sound rational. Well, so the pace of innovation, instead of relying on patents, gave the advantage to China. And here, big question. Why are the best innovations brought to fruition on a shoestring? Because of a simple confusion by financial people. Investors want to see growth before adding capital, when profits are scarce. While there is a total difference between a company acting at a loss without perspective versus an enterprise investing too fast in a promising market, lest it would not have the critical mass. But both valuations are equally abysmal. And the daring enterprise, short of liquidity, would lose control to blind financiers at a time when the need is for vision, freedom of action, and capital at once. Okay, an issue now about looking for the market, looking at market analysis. I like to say I study market analysis, and when they are favorable to something, precisely not to do it. Here is why. When you look at the potential of a market, you can be sure that the need for dollars will mean that only the big guys, the Synopsys and the Cadence, etc., will be the winners. We have to do the opposite. But venture capital managers refuse precisely the niche which they have never heard of. This is a quote. Another one, or which they do not understand. Financial people. I have heard this precisely both about risk machines in 1984 and about the IP business in 2014. There are still financial people who do not understand that the IP business exists. They don't even know the name of ARM. Now, another word about venture capital. Look at the top 3 contenders today in microprocessors for tablets. No venture capital, right? 1968, Intel has to invent stock options. People forget that, but there were no laws. They invented the principle of stock options for a team of veterans from Fairchild. Somehow they already had deep pockets. 1984, Qualcomm starts as a service supplier by 7 experienced professionals. 1990, ARM Holdings has to be funded by the industrial partner Apple. Once big, they keep their rank with a strategy of domination by the rate of innovation. They didn't even care about knowing patents. Let's go back to neuroscience. So now we are 30 years later. Neuroscience has come up with convolutional machine learning. Neural network ICs succeed in pattern recognition, but fortunately our brain neurons still do not work that way. There is more than gray cells as they are controlled by white cells. So this is again some fancy theory that they are going to imitate the brain. 1964, it's a booming time from information theory. There are not many theorems in information theory, but the misunderstanding of Shannon's theorem led to a claim that modems would be limited to transmission rates below 30 kilobaud. Initially, we were kind of wondering how we would do with the increasing need of communication in the early 80s. Well, there was a hunch. Boards quantify how fast the signal value changes. Although for a given modulation rate, the data rate can be increased by changing the encoding method. It was not seen that it could be done without going to digital. So 1994, thanks to this error, many ICs have been designed for the profits of the semiconductor industry for circuit switching ISDN at 128 kilobit per second. But in 2004, ADSL aiming at packet switching at 30 megabit per second. 2014, internet rates now reach the gigabit per second. Now, computer architectures. The challenge of standard products versus custom designs. 1971, Intel's first 4004 as a standard product, as opposed to the custom design that was requested initially. 1974, Motorola came up with the first complex instruction set. It's a computer. But also, it meant at the same time customer-specific family. It included the 6805. 1980, Intel came up with the 8080 and the 8051 as two different standard microcontrollers. In 1984, the Intel 8051 was the winner in smart cards as the dark horse IP. And it's quite interesting because there are two countries making the 8051 a winner, thanks to the smart card business, France and China. Same challenge again for IN with the reduced instruction set computers. Now that was 1994, the Argonaut RISC core, configurable, versus the Acorn RISC machine, standard. The standard architecture always is the ultimate winner. Same fate for digital signal processors. I'm not going to elaborate this one, but think of the standard over configurable. Now, the other surprise or irrational aspect for the Internet of Things, with the advent of new solutions for interactive software development. The cost of software in semiconductor is beyond the cost of hardware. The need for upward compatibility through upgrades is a crucial challenge to innovate while preserving the software legacy. So we have a design called Zephyr, facing a challenge by streamlining even further the IT 351 at 32 bits for ultra-low power consumption. Completely irrational. But what is the issue? Why is it so difficult to be rational? Rational Occidental reasoning is based, after all, on binary logic, but philosophical thinking is based on the triad of thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Carl Jung highlights the growth process through the union of opposites. What is that? How can you unite values in binary opposition? In 1908, Dutch Lutz and Boer published about the dependency on the subject matter to which binary logic is applied. So binary logic is not the winner always. 1960, Stéphane Lupasco, Romanian, originally in French when he died, published the three matters explaining the harmonization of opposites essential to Carl Jung. And I'm going to show you a series of cases which can give some thinking. 1984, we talked about the RISC versus CISC. David Patterson's RISC machine at Berkeley the MIPS centered were in typical opposition, binary opposition, against the CISC 68000, which itself was in opposition with arms risk. So the issue is, or is it, complex versus reduced. 2004, the Swiss Research Center CSEM proposed simplifications for standard cell libraries. Instead of the ever-increasing complexity of standard cell libraries, it proposed a reduced cell stem library. 2014, we have been proposing the Delta standard, which is made public, for reduced power kit libraries, similarly opposed to endless incremental complexity of complex power kit libraries with a custom reasoning preventing reusability. So is it custom versus reusable? How can you reconcile those things? Such harmonization of opposites amounts, in fact, to a new look, a new cut. It's uniting diversity of optimizations with simplicity of design by assembly. In other words, the presentation is binary. You have to take a new look to find the right solution. So what? Let's go back to the beginning of the sentence by Zhao Tingyang's quote. For sure, today's worldwide economic crisis is first due to the movements of financial capital, swollen and beyond control. But I'm afraid, and then came the end of his sentence. So let's look at the movement, and let's look at what can come up for the semiconductor industry role in the industry, and even for the sake of humanity. The PC era yielded worldwide productivity increase thanks to the semiconductor industry by information processing, and this was through the 70s and the 80s. And again, the semiconductor industry enabled the telecom era, ushering in productivity increase by internet enterprise in the 90s and the 2000s. Now the IoT announces information systems in smithereens, putting in opposition capital profitability. Oh, there are lots of people who want to make money through that versus human productivity at the scale of the world. Now, a little bit of thinking. Rationally, we are going to a catastrophe. With only two potentially worthwhile contributions to worldwide productivity and even survival, namely radical energy savings, and let's observe really the rationale. The smart grid only aims at eliminating the peaks of energy. They don't care about reducing the consumption. On the contrary, they make money with it. While smart home only aims at reducing the energy spending. What's going to happen with the two of them? Let us optimistically count on the irrationality of our industry to do what's right, rather than what is decided by purely financial investors. Last quote from Zhao Tingyang. Indeed, the deficiency of thought are clogged by appropriate actions. Thank you.